Marc Anderson, continuing to dominate Milo's channel. I'll be here this week, and we're going to be talking about specific cube design in terms of how Milo's designed his cube and maintained it since then. Alright, so we're back for this week. I wanted to go a little bit more specifically into your cube, how you design things. Last week was a little bit more general, but I wanted to start grilling you down and then see if we can get some answers.
I'm not looking forward to this, but we're here, so.
So one of the first things I wanted to ask is, you mentioned when you describe your cube, you said it's the best of except for power and boat and time
vault, yeah.
Yeah. So what was your is price
What's
the only?
Yeah, well, I mean, price is a reason. Moat and Time Vault, in particular, are two cards that are really, really powerful and create bad games, like unfun games. Like when Time Vault exists only to win the game immediately or not win the game immediately, right? Like you can't just draft Time Vault and put it in your deck.
You could,
but it would be terrible, right? You wouldn't do it. And Moat is like it just like stalls the game out and makes everybody else wait around until that table is finished, right? Like you can play a Moat control deck with one single win condition, and everybody has to wait around for that game to finish.
It's still a 4-man enchantment, and I mean that leads nicely into one of the next questions I was going to ask you. You know, enchantment's not impossible to deal with, but there are a lot of still extremely oppressive cards in your cube that almost single-handedly win the game, and some of them are extremely difficult to deal with. You know, some of the examples being something like an early Tinker is very tough to deal with, a Library of Alexandria, even in some cases Bitter Blossom, but not so bad, but Recurring Nightmares is another one, Soul Ring. All those cards basically end the game within the first few turns. It's just your opponent tries to fight to see if they can find that 5% chance of winning.
I think a lot of those situations aren't exactly the way that you might think. We saw in the Holiday Cube Championship, turn 1 Library get absolutely blown out by Black Vice Sulfuric Vortex.
Yes, that's true.
And I mean, Library of Alexandria is a great card. It's a first pick, obviously. And it's most of the time going to be very good for you, but there are definitely ways to counteract it. And in fact, the loss of tempo that they get by basically missing their one land drop in exchange for a card every turn, you can out aggro that, and you could win a lot of the time if they don't get exactly what they need, or if they weren't able to draft exactly what they need to counteract what you're doing.
So is that just part of Cube then? You know, doing these really powerful things and having someone open, you know, the Mind Twists and the Recurring Nightmares and.
The most memorable games I've ever played of Magic are when my opponent did the most unfair thing possible and I won. You know, like for me personally, the one of my greatest cube moments is when my opponent ultimated Karn, had my Vidalian Clique and my Exalted Angel, and I came back and I won the game.
I have a good Karn story.
Right? Like, them doing really... Or like getting Mind Twisted for your whole hand.
Keeping the one balance.
Keeping balance. Yeah. You know, like these moments I understand don't happen very often, but when they happen, that's like worth a year of Cube. For me personally. Seeing turn 1 Library get blown out that hard was one of my favorite moments, if not my favorite moment of the entire Cube draft. It's just such a joy to see the oppressive cards get beat. Or like imagine somebody going turn 1 Tinker into Blightsteel, next turn Innocent. Right? Like these are the things that I want to see in Cube, and they don't happen that often, but when they do happen, they're great.
Well, one of the reasons that they don't happen often is because a lot of these have very few answers to. You know, so it's when the fact person does have that one answer. You know, Black Vice is not exactly an all-star.
No,
in that match that we saw, it was obviously the best possible card that he could have had.
But I mean, there's other things like Strip Mine, Wasteland. Those see play in a lot of decks.
Yeah, they do. But you know, I just personally, my philosophy, my cube is far less powered than most cubes. And that's just because of the way I want games to play out. I want everyone to have a chance. The games go. The longer the game, in my case, the more interesting it is. And so every card that's there's a lot more answers to it. But I can totally understand that the large majority of cubes do have those. I just wanted to ask your opinions on those.
As long as there is, as long as the oppressive card either ends the game immediately, and so you're not like sitting there watching your opponent untap his time vault, constantly drawing card after card after card, trying to find their win condition, or with Moat where you're just sitting there and not doing anything. Those are cards that are bad in my opinion, just because they don't end the game necessarily, but they make you sit there and watch somebody win the game. That's kind of my criteria.
Okay, fair enough. And in terms of the construction of your cube, I used to have a lot of very strict rules, and everyone has their own rules for cube. But I know you personally used to have a planeswalker quota where you only had one planeswalker of each type.
Yeah.
We just talked about doing all these powerful things, but you used to have this restriction. So what was the reasoning behind that?
Initially, the planeswalker rule was because I wasn't playing Magic in Lorwyn, and they introduced planeswalkers when I wasn't playing. I was like, this sucks. This is stupid. I don't like this. I feel like I've matured a little bit since then. It's just also that I don't want to see, like, I don't want things to be super consistent, like I was saying before with the step links and the brainstorms. So I feel like it's not limited so much anymore when you open a pack and see 5 planeswalkers. It becomes something completely different and kind of weird, and it makes control better because most of the planeswalkers are better in control decks. But now I have 2 planeswalkers in each color, and I'm very willing to open it up and just say, if the planeswalker is the best in that drop, the best non-creature spell in that drop, then maybe it should just be there.
Yeah, that's what you answered my next question already. I was going to say you've increased that to 2, which is great,
yeah.
And you also have a lot of the gold planeswalkers now,
yeah.
which obviously aren't 1 per color or 2 per color. And I think that the 2 that you have in each are the most powerful in each of those.
Yeah, but I want to put Sark and Dragonspeaker in the queue.
That's the one I was gonna tell you. Highly recommended. He's a great card. Okay, so is it a similar story? Again, another one of these restrictions you had. You used to have it so that it was exactly 60 cards of each color. Yeah. And then all of the colors except for, I believe, green and blue were a 30-30 split for creatures and non-creatures.
Yeah, I don't have that restriction anymore. I just open it up to whatever the best cards in those drops. I try to make the drops consistent with the themes of the color. So like red will definitely have more 1 and 2 drops. It's not going to be like a 6-drop color. And same with black and white. You kind of want them to have more aggressive drops in terms of creatures. And then blue, they only have one drop in the entire creature slot. Which is Delver. It's kind of based on what Wizards prints too. Like we're restricted in what Wizards prints. If Wizards prints better red 1-drops than blue 1-drops, then we're not going to force blue and make blue the aggressive color and make red the control color.
So let's say they've kind of been doing the opposite recently, but let's say they started printing more and more powerful spells.
Yeah.
You've removed your restriction, but would you still sort of try and keep in mind a rough number of creatures? Because you obviously still want there to be creature interaction in the
I do. Absolutely. Yeah, I want there to be creature interaction, but if Magic became more fun without creatures, then I would say I'd reassess, and say, oh, well, if I added more spells than creatures, would Magic be more fun for all of us in total? Like, that's always the major concern. It takes priority over everything else. Are you having fun? Would you be having more fun if this happened, right? Those are the questions you really have to ask yourself first when making a decision for your cube.
Fair enough. And so going into more specifics, one of the things I wanted to talk about was the concept of having morphs in cube. With Khans of Tarkir, morphs are at the forefront right now. It seems as though morphs, especially the older ones, are more and more outclassed these days. Spending your 3rd turn to play a 2/2, it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't leave you a lot of room to do a lot of powerful things there. So I found that a lot of the problems with morphs in cube now are that as soon as they play them, you already know what it is. Because if they're playing, white-blue and you've only seen 1 or 2 morphs in the draft, it's an Exalted Angel, it kind of loses a bit of the mystery there. So do you think that affects it at all? What's your opinions on morphs in cube?
I think that morphs are more interesting in pauper cubes or peasant cubes because you have more variety of cards that you can choose. Like, there's a lot more cards that are acceptable to be playing in that style of cube. In my cube, if somebody plays a morph and they're in green, that's probably an Antuka Vigilante. If something.
Well, you did add Rattleclaw Mystic recently, didn't you?
Yeah, I did, but that's not a green card.
Well, okay.
I think that Rattleclaw Mystic is probably best in black-blue. But yeah, I think that morphs in cube. In my cube specifically, you know what they are most of the time, but they're just good enough, generally, that you'd want to play them even though your opponent knows what they are. You want your opponent to play around Willbender if they know it's Willbender, because then they're playing probably worse than they normally would be. If you have a morph and it's Exalted Angel, you're still gonna play Exalted Angel, right? Like it's a layaway 4/5 lifelink with flying.
One of the things that I've seen it's on the MTGO Cube and it's in your cube as well, that seems to work a bit better online, is the concept of miracles in cube. Especially with it being a more casual format.
Yeah.
People are not really willing to try and do the pro level play of drawing it, looking at it first, putting it in your hand, and then revealing it if it's a miracle card. So has there been any sticky situations with that? It can be a little bit awkward if your opponent draws, shuffles, and then is like, wait a second, this is this bonfire.
Well, then I feel like if that happens, they lose out on the ability to miracle their card. That's just how it works, right? You can't prove it. Yeah. I mean, it's their fault. It was no fault of the other players, right?
I think the real issue with it though is that if I'm drafting and normally I'm not going to be looking at my top card that carefully, but if I have a miracle and I want to play it properly, I'm going to have to almost tell my opponent that, hey, I'm playing red and green. There's obviously a bonfire in my deck, because every draw step I'm pausing and before I put it in my hand.
Yeah, I mean, if you're used to that and it's hard for you to break the habit, then I could understand that being a problem. One of the things that you can do, sometimes I play like this, is where I look at my hand and then I keep my hand face down on the table, not holding it, and then during my draw step I just draw a card, right? You don't have to be holding your entire hand and looking at it constantly. You know what's in your hand, you see it. You know it's in your hand. Just put it face down on the table and then draw your card. That's one way to get out of it. But
I just decided, in my mind, I just avoided it because it just seemed...
And I think that's reasonable, for sure, to just avoid it completely.
Is there three mirrors?
No, there's only the two, the Entreat and the Bonfire.
No Terminus.
No Terminus. Okay. But although Terminus is probably one of the better ones, I think there are probably arguments for Terminus being better than Bonfire at the Dam. But
well, I mean, it's a bit of a different situation. I think Terminus is a very good card, and it's one of the ones that's really interesting to set up on their turn.
Yeah, and it's also another white one. So if you're playing differently and you're playing white, they don't know if it's Entreat or Terminus.
Right. I can understand that. Now, in terms of functional reprints, there's been a lot of them over the years, especially when they started printing core sets and they changed the names of a bunch of cards. You mentioned in one of the earlier segments that one of the things you did to make aggro better was you put in Elite Vanguard and Savannah Lions.
Yes.
And you have Llanowar Elves and you have Finrondalder.
Yeah.
And so, Finrondals, excuse me. So you're willing to do this in terms of the cube, and then you have other cards in your cube that they have a functional reprint, but they're not there. Can you explain some of the reasoning behind that?
Sure. The Elite Vanguard Savannah Lion situation is one that I'm probably going to be changing very soon, so I'm not going to speak too much about that. Llanowar Elves, Finrond Elves, the problem is that those are just the best one-drops in green, right? Like, there's nothing else that I would want to fill those slots with currently.
Okay. If
more cards are printed and there's, more interesting, diverse cards in green one-drop, then I would consider replacing Finrond Elves or Llanowar Elves with that. I mean, you can see that Elvish Mystic's not in my cube, right?
Yeah.
Like,
okay.
I that's a card that's probably better than Basking Rootwalla, but it was just like a third one is something I really don't want to do. The two of them are fine. Plus Noble Hierarch, Absence Pilgrim. There's so many already. But it's just a problem that those are actually just the best green one-drops. Then there's other cards, like, I think one example you said earlier was Essence Scatter and Remove Soul.
Yeah, well, I looked through, some of the ones that there are reprints available for is Searing Spear Lightning Strike.
Yeah, okay, so Searing Spear Lightning Strike, I already have Searing Spear and Incinerate.
Yeah.
So I have enough versions of that in the 2-drop. Those are the best red 2-drops and in terms of non-creature spells, and I feel like I've filled up the red 2-drops. If they print other red 2-drops that aren't lightning bolts that cost 2, then maybe I'll consider switching them.
One of those is Armageddon has a functional reprint.
I don't have the money to purchase Ravages of War.
Oh, it's quite expensive.
It's like hundreds of dollars for an Armageddon. Yeah, and you see, I would, you know what, it would make the cube if it existed in a cheaper format. There's some cards that I just don't have because they They cost money. Like I didn't have a mana drain in my cube for a really long time, but eventually I ended up getting it. Ravages of War, though, is an interesting one just because they reprint so many cards from Portal 3 Kingdoms as Judge promos and different sets that, like, especially with from the Vault Cataclysm, I really thought Ravages of War was going to get reprinted in that one. I'm just waiting for them to do a cheap reprint. I don't want to, like, put forward the money and end up picking it up, and then 1 week later they're like, hey, here's a $20 foil version. You know, so
I can understand that. Okay.
How do you feel about it?
In my cube, I've just decided for elegance sake to just include the one copy of each of them. As for picking which one over the other, in most cases it doesn't matter.
Whichever one you happen to have at that time.
In some cases, I did have a Savannah Lions and switch it out for an Elite Vanguard because of Mayor.
Yeah.
So there's actually a reason to have the human instead of the non-human in there. But beyond that, I just figured I didn't want to go for doubles for all of them. So I was fed up with Wizards doing these functional reprints. So I'm just like, no, one copy. You just get one copy. But I know it's not. I mean, the MTG Cube has duplicates as well, so it's pretty common to see two copies of those types of cards. Wildfire and Burning of Zangief or whatever.
Zangief. I'm Zangief. I don't know about that guy. Yeah. How about if you have one that's a really sweet foil and it's signed and altered? Would you rather play that one over the other one?
If it was the same, then yes. But if I had a really sweet Savannah Lions, it would still be the Elite Vanguard, just because it's just better.
You actually don't have a lot of foils or things like that in your cube. You don't look for that sort of thing.
No, my cube gets beaten up all the time. I have sweaty hands. My mistakes get gross. I riffle shuffle them.
Yeah. So
I just want a copy of the card. I want it to be real because I'd rather use the real cards. But beyond that, the cheapest version I'm happy with.
Okay.
If someone happens to give me a nice one or I get an upgrade, I'll switch it out. And for example, all of my Garricks in my cube are foil, which is kind of funny.
But it just happened that way.
But it just happened.
Yeah.
One of them was actually Christina drafted at 401, and she opened a foil Garrick, and that made it in. So there's a nice story behind that one. But the other two, I just happened to have foil versions of them.
Now, if that Garrick eventually got outclassed, would you keep it in just because you had that story?
I wouldn't. Okay. I'm very ruthless with my cube, and I'm constantly monitoring it. It's it's kind of it's like I have a child now, but it's like a second child. It's something you take care of, you look after it, you need to make sure it's healthy and doing well. So
the older brother.
Yeah. I'll introduce them to each other one day, and I'm sure it'll be glorious. All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching. That's all we have for this week. If you do have any great stories about Cube or any opinions on any of the duplicates, or if you look through Milo's Cube, it is on Cube Tutor. We can post a link to that, and if you have any opinions on there, feel free to leave it in the comments. Until then, we'll see you next time.